Welcome everyone to today's hearing titled, quote, How the Corruption of Science Has Impacted Public Perception and Policy Regarding Vaccines. I also want to thank the witnesses for their time, effort, and willingness to testify. The awareness that much of scientific research is unreliable is not new. In an article published in January 2009 entitled, quote, Drug Companies and Doctors, A Story of Corruption, Dr. Marcia Angel stated, quote, It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published, or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as, and here's the real jaw-dropping part of this, over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. This isn't Ron Johnson making that quote. That is an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. In a 2016 survey published in the journal Nature found that, quote, more than 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments, unquote. And in May 2024, Wiley, a major academic publisher, closed 19 journals, primarily due to issues with fraudulent papers, largely attributed to paper mills producing fake or compromised studies. In the 2 years leading up to May 2024, Wiley had retracted more than 11,300 papers that were deemed compromised, often due to manipulated peer review process or fabricated content. I've invited 2 witnesses who will discuss different examples of how research can be doctored or withheld in order to support a predetermined narrative and support the powerful interests that benefit from that narrative. Attorney Aaron Siri will unveil a high-quality study completed in 2020 and suspiciously withheld by the authors that shows vaccinated children suffer 2.5 times the rate of chronic illness compared to unvaccinated children. PhD researcher Dr. Toby Rogers will discuss the history and obvious flaws in studies researching for the cause of autism. Minorities witness Dr. Jake Scott will make the case the public should rely on research proving that vaccines are safe and effective.
We've been talking about medical issues. You're not a medical doctor, are you?
No, sir.
And you're not an immunologist or biologist or any kind of...
Or vaccinologist, no, but I depose them regularly, including the world's leading ones with regards to vaccines, and I have to make my claims based on actual evidence when I go to court with regards to vaccines. I don't get to rely on titles.
Okay. But you're not a doctor.
No, I prefer not to be a doctor because I prefer to rely on the evidence, not slogans like we've been hearing.
Okay. Let me ask you, have you spoken to Secretary Kennedy about his decision to approve COVID-19 or limit the approval and availability of COVID-19 vaccine?
No, sir.
You have not? Okay. Have you spoken to him about the vaccine injury compensation program?
I do not recall.
You have represented him, correct?
Yeah, I represented him when he was running for president of the United States of America. I've represented him during that period to get him off ballots across the country. I've represented him in some other capacities. I've also co-counseled with him in many cases for almost a decade.
Have you been under consideration to be part of his team at HHS?
I have not put my name in to be part of the government. I respectfully prefer to be outside of government.
Mr. Rogers, I understand your degree is in political economy, correct?
Correct. As I mentioned, to earn a PhD, one must make an original contribution to knowledge as verified by external peer review. That's the degree that I have. And unfortunately, these days, medical school is just a glorified trade school for people trained to obey the pharmaceutical industry. Now, trade schools can be great, but Western allopathic medicine has completely lost its way. So, but I'm a doctor of philosophy and social sciences.
Okay, I guess we've established your views on the medical profession. I'm curious, I don't know the answer to this question. In some of your Twitter posts, you said, and I'm quoting, "You people are all going to spend eternity in hell. Nuremberg 2 first, then hell." What did you mean by that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I believe that we are in the midst of one of the greatest crimes in human history. We have a product being injected into children 70 plus times over the course of their development. It's never been tested against a proper saline placebo. Over that course of that time period, chronic illness in this country has gone from 10% of children having one or more chronic conditions to now more than 50% of children having one or more chronic conditions. Secretary Kennedy, in the hearing that was last week, said that the latest data from the CDC says that 76% of Americans now have one or more chronic conditions. And I believe that lots of these chronic conditions stem from iatrogenic injury. We have 3 million children with autism. Back in 1970, the rate was so low that it was essentially zero. I'm outraged by that, and I think every person in this room should be outraged by that. I don't know how to say it anymore clearly that we need to change course in this country. And I'm terribly disappointed by the medical profession. In the social sciences, there's this term called epistemic capture, which is when the entire knowledge production process becomes captured by one industry. And that's what's happened with science and medicine. And so I think we need to change course. And I think the people who have covered up the autism epidemic and the epidemics of iatrogenic injury should be held to account for their actions.
Are you comparing? I'm holding up a copy of the tweet. I'm sure you recognize it. You people are all going to spend eternity in hell.
I think that's overstated. I think you're putting words in my mouth, respectfully, Senator.
I'm asking the question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So look, let's put it in the context of COVID. I've already talked about autism. Let's talk about COVID. The state, however you define that, the military, CDC, Tony Fauci, Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, created a weaponized virus, correct? Gain-of-function research. They contracted it out to China, and it caused a pandemic around the world once it was released. The government created a weaponized virus that then got out and caused a global pandemic. When are we going to have accountability for that? I generally don't understand why government officials are allowed to engage in
Rogers, I'm not putting
research.
words in your mouth. I'm just quoting your words.
I would like to have
And I think
accountability for the COVID era, and I'd like to have accountability for the fact that the CDC has known since 1999 that vaccines cause autism, and they've covered it up for 26 years. How do we begin to have accountability? You want to call it something different? Truth commissions, criminal trials?
So
I would love
you're
that.
comparing the COVID-19 vaccine to the Holocaust.
Yes.
Sir,
Well,
respectfully.
I
No,
will
first-
ask that these posts be entered in the record if there's no objection.
Objection. Okay, let's. I want to move on.
Let me
According to your testimony, back in 1970, might have been 1 in 10,000, a little less certain than using CDC numbers, but there's been an explosion. What are we doing about it? Who's asleep at the wheel? Who's trying to determine what caused this? As Dr. Chris Palmer said, when it comes to chronic illness, and I'd throw autism in there, they don't want the root cause discovered. That's why people are outraged. That's why people may put on Twitter things that they may regret later. Let's put up the next chart, number 3. This is probably my most censored chart. Dr. Scott, were you aware that worldwide on VAERS we've reported 38,742 deaths worldwide associated with the COVID vaccine? Were you aware of that carnage?
I'm not aware of that figure in particular.
In America, I believe the number 19,000, correct? Again,
But theirs does not prove causality.
oh, I've heard that time and time again. So let's take a look at the bottom figure down here. Of those 38,000 deaths, 9,252, 23.9%, it's called 24%, occurred on the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. Now, I know that doesn't prove causation, but man, that's a correlation that we ought to look at. Do you know to what extent VAERS is reported to understate adverse events? Do you have any idea? Have you seen any studies on that?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
To what extent does VAERS underreport adverse events? Again, it's a pain to report something to VAERS. Okay, doctors are busy, takes half hour, 45 minutes. A lot of people don't know about it, so the vast majority of adverse events from a vaccine or a drug doesn't get reported to VAERS. So again, they've actually done studies on this. Do you know what percent actually get reported versus what doesn't get reported?
No.
Somewhere between 1 to 10%, correct, Mr. Siri?
No, it's less than 1% according to an AHRQ-funded study of Harvard researchers. And
So if it's less than 1%, let's just use U.S. figures. Okay, by the way, what is this? 17,000 or 19,000 U.S. deaths? Yeah, it's close. Okay, it's one of those 17 or 19,000 deaths reported in the U.S. based on VAERS. If we're only recording 1 out of 100, that would mean deaths from the vaccine is somewhere between like 170,000 in the U.S. 170, again, that's that kind of reporting ratio. This is why people are outraged. And what people are denying, they're not denying the potential effectiveness of vaccines. I think most of us think, yeah, they probably work to a certain extent. Okay? What they're denying are the vaccine injuries, the injection injuries. Mr. Scott, how much do you know about the mRNA technology?
Fair amount.
So is the mRNA that's encapsulated in the lipid nanoparticle, is that true mRNA?
Is it true mRNA?
I mean, true mRNA, the messenger RNA, degrades very rapidly in the body. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Correct.
So the mRNA in the injection, is it true mRNA? Does it degrade rapidly in the body? Do you not know?
I do know. Yes, it does. But
it does. No, it does not. It's modified. It's modified mRNA, and it's designed not to degrade. And there are studies that show it sticks around the body. We don't know how long. The lipid nanoparticle. Do you realize that it was designed to permeate difficult to permeate barriers, like the blood-brain, like the blood barrier? Did you know that? Did you believe when Fauci told us that the mRNA shot would stay in the arm? Did you believe that? It's a simple yes or no. I mean, do you believe the COVID injection stayed in everybody's arm? Do you believe that's what happened?
Primarily.
You think so, huh? Were you aware of the Japanese FOIA of the study that was conducted of biodistribution, where in rats it biodistributed all over the body, accumulated in the adrenal glands, in the ovaries? Because the lipid nanoparticle is designed to permeate difficult to permeate barriers, the designers knew, and they did a study that would biodistribute all over the body, but our CDC, Anthony Fauci, said it was going to stick in the arm. Now, do you know what the mRNA does? It's not a traditional vaccine, is it? Do you realize that? It's not an attenuated or a dead virus. It's messenger RNA, modified RNA, this encapsulated lipid nanoparticle. It distributes all over the body, and when it attaches to a cell, it unloads its mRNA into the cell. It turns the cell into a manufacturing cell of a protein that is toxic to it. Do you realize that? Are you aware of that? I mean, just yes or no. I mean, do you know that or not? Because I talk to a lot of doctors who don't have a clue.
I know a fair amount about the mRNA vaccines. Do I know about all of these studies that you're referring to?
This isn't a study. This is the basic operation. Do you know how it works? It doesn't appear like you do.
Well,
So again, why would we have
don't.
Why would we have almost 1.7 million adverse events, dramatically understating it? Why would we have that number of deaths? It's because these little lipid nanoparticles are distributed all over the body. They're attaching to cells. They're turning cells like a heart cell into a manufacturing site for the spike protein, which is toxic, and the body attacks it. It causes inflammation. That's what myocarditis is. And the designers of the injection knew it. And Anthony Fauci knew it, and he lied. That's why somebody like Mr. Rogers, Dr. Rogers, gets so upset and is outraged by the cover-up of this. That's the problem here. I've got a lot more to say. Have you heard, do you know anything about, for example, the DNA contamination that's being reported? I want to enter into the record the McKernan study, just recently released, without objection. There's no way to object. Again, have you heard about this? That there's DNA contamination in, particularly the Pfizer? You're aware of that?
yes. And
Do you know at what levels it exceeds the FDA recommended amounts?
No.
36 to 627 times. The allowed amount is 10 nanograms per dose. And this research paper shows it's 36 to 627 times higher than that. Does that concern you?
Yeah, if that's a legitimate finding, yes. That's not the information that I've been aware of.
No, but it saves 3.2 million lives. No, it didn't. It's impossible. That's entirely possible. Okay, so I got the McKernan study there. How about Dennis Rancourt's study? Are you aware of that one? It's a model.
No.
But it's a model of, I think, 17 equatorial and south hemisphere countries whose excess all-cause mortality was highly correlated to the uptake in the vaccine. So based off that study, their data, he estimates 17 million people died of the COVID injection. 17 million. I don't know. It's a model. It's like the 154 million. It's like the 3.2 million. It's like the 2.5 million. It's all those numbers that are confidently spewed. This study gets no reaction. I've entered that in the record. Ask you, the 1986 law set up a task force. It was disbanded in 1998. It was supposed to produce reports on how to improve vaccine safety. How many of those reports were ever produced to Congress?
So the mandate for safer childhood vaccines, which you're referring to under the 1986 Act, the third section, in 3 parts, required a biannual report to Congress that explained how HHS, in which the FDA, CDC, and NIH are all located, made vaccines safer in the prior 2 years. The total number of reports since 1986 are 0. 0. Never been submitted. The second part of the mandate for safer childhood vaccine creates a task force, which you just mentioned, Senator. That task force is comprised of the head of the NIH, CDC, and FDA, and they're supposed to make recommendations on how to make vaccines safer to the Secretary of HHS. That task force made one set of recommendations in 1998 and then was disbanded. It has now been under Secretary Kennedy put together. The first part of the mandate, if I may add, is what actually requires HHS to make vaccines safer, right? Because they made the pharma companies immune to liability. They took away the normal market forces that would drive them to actually engage in safety, recognizing that Congress, in its wisdom, at least in that part, was wise, it made HHS responsible for vaccine safety. And of course, if HHS is not doing the simple parts of the mandate for safer childhood vaccine, which underpins all of vaccine safety in this country, of putting biannual reports to Congress, of having a task force, you think they're doing the hard part in part one? Of course not.
Talk about V-Safe. Switching gears, kind of sticking to COVID. I mean, you're the one that had to sue. You know, I think one of the interesting, I think that actually the very last sentence in Dr. Scott's testimony is, let me find it. The data are public.
Yeah, the data certainly are not public. First of all, when it comes to the clinical trials for each vaccine, we've had to sue the FDA to get the underlying clinical trial reports. For most of them, we've sued for the Varivax vaccine, for the Hep B vaccine, for many of them, and for the COVID vaccine.
Real
That's
quick,
not public.
let me
Sorry.
get back to V-Safe.
V-Safe.
Dr. Rogers, isn't it true that even peer reviewers don't get to look at the data of studies? That's common,
Right.
generally true. I mean, what is the truth in terms of how often researchers actually make the raw data available?
I mean, a proper study should make the data available. That's a norm, but that doesn't happen. In
You know, I
the
mean,
case
part of the
vaccine.
problem with that, the Amstead et al. Study in Denmark, that's being touted that aluminum is not a problem, is people questioning cannot get the data even though it's already been de-identified. Correct?
And that's true. Of yes.
And by the way, the data safety link.
Yeah, the VSD, the vaccine safety data.
What happened to that? How available is that right now?
It's not. In 2000, up until 2000, it was part of the CDC, and you could get access to it through FOIA. A number of people did. Published studies the CDC didn't fit the policy about vaccines, and so they then shifted it over to a trade association to get it out of the reach of the Freedom of Information Act and others. It's been distributed. You can't get
That's
access
not
to
very.
VSD.
That's for that. It's not exactly transparency, is it?
But it's actually literally, it's not only is it not transparent, you cannot get the data underlying VSD studies they publish, like the data for 2 of them, which is antithetical to how science, you can't do reproducibility. Not only that, it's selection bias, because if you want to do a study, it has to go through CDC's clearance process, actually, which means that only studies that conform with this policy that vaccines are safe are going to get published.
So let's talk about the V-Safe, which was established for the COVID injection. 10 million people voluntarily signed up. I mean, I think what they report is completely inadequate. But talk about how you had to sue and how long it took you to get the data from what was supposed to be the transparent safety surveillance system, and then what the results were. Could you just quick tell that story?
Over 2 years, over actually collectively almost 3 years of litigation it took. V-Safe was a safety system rolled out in December 2020 along with the release of the first COVID vaccine. Up until that point, CDC touted VAERS, and they said, well, VAERS isn't reliable, we're going to have V-Safe. V-Safe, they said, was a robust, rapid way to identify safety issues with COVID-19 vaccine. 10 million Americans signed up very rapidly over about 6 months. These were the vaccine enthusiasts who got the vaccine from December 2020, and about 9 million in those first 6 months. And they got a form to fill out every day for 7 days after the shot, then every week for 6 weeks, and then 3 times after that. On that form, we checked the boxes. There were basically 2 types of check boxes. First, check the box was for symptoms. But the symptoms that the CDC chose to include were the ones that they say are normal and fine after the vaccine, and they only collect that for 7 days, what they call reactogenicity. They're good. They show the vaccine is working, you're having an immune response. So that data was completely irrelevant for assessing safety. In fact, they reported 60-70% of people reporting having that, and the CDC said, great. That leaves only one other check-the-box data that was actually worthwhile, and that was folks seeking hospital care, missing schoolwork, or not performing normal daily activities. Well, what the CDC was doing is they were pumping out study after study after study that only showed the first week after the shot for those 3 categories. Well, we wanted to see the full data set. My client, the Informed Consent Action Network, wanted to see the full data set. So we said to the CDC, hey, this stuff's totally de-identified. Just release it. It's literally sitting there in files. You can release it in 2 minutes. It took us almost two federal lawsuits, a year and a half of litigation, 2 years of litigation almost to get that data. And when we did, it was clear why the CDC wanted to hide it. They wanted to hide it because what it showed was 7.7% of these vaccine enthusiasts reported needing medical care that they attributed most likely to the vaccine after getting the COVID shot. 7.7, that's 1 in 13, and on average, they sought medical care 2 to 3 times each. You don't go to seek medical care 2 to 3 times each. And 75% of those were hospitalization, emergency room, or urgent care. So these were serious issues. I don't know if, and that was the only data point that VSafe could possibly have used to actually assess safety. If 1 in 13 seeking medical care on average 2 to 3 times each of the manner I just described is not enough to pull the plug, it was clear VSafe was not designed to assess safety. VSafe was designed to affirm its a priori belief this shot was safe. If it wanted to make VSafe actually a system that would assess safety, it would have added, for example, a check the box for chest pain, right? So they can assess myocarditis. It could have added a check the box for the numerous adverse events of special interest that its own VSafe protocol identified 2 months before it rolled out, including myocarditis, pericarditis, all the issues blood clotting we ended up seeing. From the clinical trial, apparently it knew that these could potentially be issues. It put it in the design documents, but it never made it into the actual system itself. VSafe was not designed. It's the closest thing to mens rea, purposeful intent to design this system to assure that it would never actually show a safety issue. I don't think they expected that many people to report seeking medical care.
Can I add something?
Sure.
I just want to emphasize that the last thing I want to do is cause any harm. The last thing I want to do is the last thing I want is for anyone to be harmed by a vaccine. If there is a vaccine safety issue, I want it to be detected. And there are multiple overlapping layers of monitoring systems that I do think work pretty well. Are they perfect? No. But when it comes to, de-identifying data and all that, it's a little complicated. So, but there are a number of other data monitoring systems. But it's just really important that we understand that there is not some grand conspiracy amongst the CDC, FDA, EMA, around the entire world, thousands of scientists and doctors and public health experts, you really believe are conspiring for the sake of helping pharmaceutical industries profit?
I think
Mayor,
I think this is a case example why that happens, is because if you conduct a study and get the results that runs counter to their interests, they will destroy you. I mean, again, I had Dr. Peter McCulloch, I had Dr. Pierre Corey, I had a bunch of other people come before Congress, testify truthfully. Their careers were destroyed. They were destroyed. It doesn't take too many people to be targeted and made an example of before everybody else kind of goes, I don't think I'll step out of line. And so I think that's, again, the sympathy shown by Mr. Bigtree and Mr. Siri in terms of the people that they convinced to do the study. They didn't basically want to rat them out. I'm the one that ratted them out. Okay, and so I force them along here. Okay, it's because, and again, and I hope, God, I truthfully hope, because I think the people who did those studies, Dr. Dr. Zur, what is it?
Dr. Zervos.
Again, I don't want to see them lose their job. I'd like to pin a medal on them in terms of, good, you conducted a great study, shame on you for not publishing it, but we understand because we know you probably would have had your career destroyed. All those years in medical schools, all the lives that you save when you treat patients, you won't be able to do anymore because the certification bureaus, the boards, they will destroy a career. Again, I've seen it. I know the people. It happened during COVID. So yeah, is it a grand conspiracy? I don't know what you call it. It's certainly what I would call the COVID cartel and the medical establishment cartel and captured agencies. Yeah, that absolutely exists. Okay, you don't think so?
No, I don't. I think that I love people. I love my patients. I try to give them the best care that I can provide them. I discuss the risks and benefits. I discuss the risks and benefits of every vaccine or every intervention. I have a nuanced conversation with them. I don't shame them, no matter what their views
on the
are.
payroll.
Do you think doctors should have been fired for prescribing ivermectin? Do you think they should have had their certification taken away from them? Do you think they should have been sued? Do you think that should happen to doctors? By the way, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine are all FDA approved, and you as a physician have full off-label prescription rights, correct?
Correct.
So again, do you think it was right that doctors who prescribed ivermectin were fired, were decertified, lost their license? Do you think that should have happened?
I don't have an opinion.
Oh,
You really don't, huh?
no opinion.
No, I don't.
Wow.
I've never thought about it. I don't.
Think about it now.
Answer the
By the way,
fucking
by the way,
question.
I truly want you to come back.
I would love to.
Okay. Swear on the Bible. We're going to have you come back with Peter McCulloch and Dr. Pierre Corey and Brian Cole. Might even have Dr. Malone. Which, by the way, don't leave, because I think I'm going to ask consent to have you come up and defend yourself, seeing as you were slandered in this hearing. I think we're kind of running the course here. I mean, I could keep going. I mean, I would recommend everybody watching the hearing. This will be posted. Mr. Siri's response to Dr. Scott's testimony. I think it's important. I think it's insightful. But what I will do is I'll give all three witnesses an opportunity to just make some concluding remarks.
If I may just address a number of things that were said that I think are important to address just on the record. I appreciate that opportunity. In terms of the Henry Ford study, first I'd like to just say that the scientists that engaged in the study should be given incredible credit for having the fortitude to at least do the study. Now maybe they didn't go through it at the end of the day and publish it because they don't want to lose their jobs, and it got the result they didn't expect, but they at least went and did it. Which I could say is far more than I could say for most scientists that I've tried to interact with. In terms of the claim with regards to, somebody asked, well, what did any journal say about it? No journal had an opportunity because they don't want to get fired, though they themselves have reaffirmed it. And I litigate around studies all the time. I've read hundreds, thousands. You can watch my depositions regarding specific studies. In terms of a design of this study, this is probably one of the best designed studies in the area of vaccines I've ever seen, by far, and it is the best study.
And by the way, no study is perfect. It's hard to design these things. I mean, just
absolutely
give them that credit.
But what they did is that unlike some of these other studies that play games or have basically vaccinated versus vaccinated studies, that's what most vaccine science is. I'm going to compare this person that got X amount of X and this one got X amount of. That's not the way you should assess the safety of any product. You got to look at folks who got it versus those that don't. The other thing is that
the analogy I use on that is kind of like saying, well, we wanted to study the danger of arsenic. Let's compare it against hemlock.
Yeah.
Maybe not a perfect analogy.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to look at 17 vaccines in this group, 6 in the other, and I'm going to say C vaccines don't cause autism, for example. That's not a good way to assess whether vaccines do or do not cause autism, as an example. Now, an issue kept being raised about ADHD. How could there be 0 cases of ADHD in the unvaccinated group? First of all, I'd like to point out that there are issues in the unvaccinated population in this study. There are kids, for example, 52 children had asthma who were completely unvaccinated. So obviously, there are other environmental insults that can harm children, not just vaccines, right? But when it comes to ADHD, and I have this in my submission, the underlying science on ADHD shows that it is a result of a form of immune system dysregulation. ADHD is blamed on something going wrong in the immune system of our kids, and there is biological plausibility for precisely how vaccines could cause ADHD and why you might have ended up with 0. And if Dr. Scott ever looked at some of the other studies out there that do have vax, then they're smaller. They have not as robust as this, but they exist. One of them, they also found far higher rates of ADHD amongst the vaccinated population. In terms of biological plausibility, I will rest on my submissions where I go through each of these conditions, cite to peer-reviewed science that shows the etiology often is some form of immune system issue, and they can be caused by immune system related issues. On the autism piece, on the null hypothesis, yes, there was one case. There were 23 cases of autism in the vaccinated group. There was 1 case of autism in the unvaccinated group in the study. Back up until basically 2012, you could not diagnose and bill under the billing codes for ADHD and autism. You had to pick, okay? So most autism cases did end up in the ADHD category up until that time, because that's how the DSM-4 was structured at the time. DSM-4-5 changed that system, and so there's probably a lot of the autism is probably within the ADHD category in this study, by the way. But putting that aside, that also, one is that you've lost those, the ADHD category, and then 2, if you don't have enough power, you can't reach a conclusion. The confidence interval crosses the one line on both sides. So it could be there's an increased risk, it could even be a decreased risk. This study just can't tell you, that's all.
I think it's fair to say, you take a look at that Henry Ford study, it's not perfect, it's not necessarily determinative. What it says is, we ought to look at this more.
Absolutely.
We ought to take this seriously. I mean, it's pretty high probability that, heavy vaccination might lead to higher incidence of chronic illness. I mean, it says that. I mean, that seems to be indisputable. Whether you can't read the whole thing as everything is gospel and this is black and white. The world is gray.
And you were accused earlier of being cherry picking that Commonwealth Fund study, though I will point out that is what Dr. Scott, and the only study he put in the United States to produce COVID-19 vaccines.
By the way, that's been quoted here in these hearings before this. I kept going, where are they getting this 3.2? What's that all about? Well, I found out, and like I said, did my own arithmetic.
And I appreciate Dr. Scott's anecdotal experience with COVID, but that's not the way we make scientific decisions. We have to look at the data. And I think when you look at the data, right, not on slogans, not on what people feel about these products, okay? I mean, he might be I have no doubt Dr. Scott's a very nice guy. I don't know him. He might be a very nice gentleman.
He's been a pretty good sport.
And he's been a great sport, and he's endured a lot here today. He's probably not been exposed to a lot of this data and side information, and that's true of most doctors that I depose. I mean, your typical pediatrician and ID doctor, infectious disease doctor, when I depose them about vaccines, they know nothing. I mean, you put him through the ringer on COVID-19 vaccines, but that's not what he's trained to know. He's not trained. It's not within his knowledge. It's not part of his training. It's not what his typical experience is. That's my experience with most doctors. I mean, they're bad. They just don't know. And at the end of the day, I know that they're taught that there's this incredible body of science that underpins the safety of vaccines. I can tell you, as somebody who has to litigate these products, that is just a slogan. Okay? It is not true. And the fact that there are so many doctors who agree that that's true is of no moment. The fact that medical organizations say it is of no moment. The only thing that matters is what the evidence itself actually shows. And you can crowdsource as many clinical trials as you want from around the world randomly, haphazardly on some Excel file list on the internet. But that does not change what the actual clinical trials were that were relied upon to license each child a vaccine. And when you look at each one of those, as we have done, as we need to do for our work, they are disturbing. They do not affirm the safety of these products. There is not a single routine injection childhood vaccine that was licensed based on a trial that affirmed its safety.
Thank you, Mr. Siri.
Courage in the face of the wealthiest and most powerful industry in the history of the world. So let me explain how all this works. This is right in my wheelhouse. This is what I study. I follow the money. Autism is a political economy problem. These are all political economy problems. So let me explain how this works. Thus far, the government has failed in response to the autism epidemic because of regulatory capture. Rather than protecting public health, regulators have advanced the interests of the pharmaceutical industry. That's pretty straightforward. Science and medicine have failed in response to the autism epidemic because of epistemic capture. And what I mean by that is that the pharmaceutical industry has captured every step in the knowledge production process in science and medicine. Big Pharma controls what is studied, how it is researched, and what qualifies as evidence. This capture permeates every level of the system. Medical textbooks and curricula are influenced by financially conflicted academics. Universities and department chairs hold substantial pharmaceutical ties. Most clinical trials are conducted by for-profit contract research organizations in China and the Third World. A large share of scientific journal articles are ghostwritten. The pharmaceutical industry spends over $27 billion annually on drug promotion and continuing medical education. Standards of care are authored by conflicted physicians. So from the first day of medical school to the final years of practice, doctors live inside an epistemic bubble engineered by the pharmaceutical industry to increase its profits. Senator Blumenthal and Dr. Scott only pay attention to captured science, science that's controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. The correct answers, the best science, is happening outside of that epistemic bubble. The entire system of knowledge production in science and medicine needs to be overhauled to liberate it from the biases and distortions imposed by the pharmaceutical industry. So just to wrap up, an estimated 115,000 children develop autism every year in the United States. That means that 315 children develop autism every day in the US. And if Dr. Sally Ozanoff's work is correct, and she's at UC Davis, she shows that 88% of autism cases are characterized by regression. That means that, so if she's right about that, and I think she is, that means that 277 children regress into autism every day in the United States. Now, regression suggests an acute toxic exposure, not genetics, not better awareness, an acute toxic exposure, which means that most cases of autism are preventable. Autism is not a medical or scientific mystery. We know beyond a reasonable doubt that toxicants, mostly from vaccines and about a dozen additional toxicants, are causing autism. If we repeal the 1980 Bayh-Dole Act, the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, and the 2005 PrEP Act, that would remove the structural incentives that created the autism epidemic and the chronic disease epidemics in this country. Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Rogers. And society, trust me, doesn't want to bear the costs. I mean, the cost of compensating vaccine and injection injured, again, I'm a fiscal hawk. We're $37 trillion in debt. That's a problem. So again, in all honesty, what do you say to those parents that have that experience?
Well, I certainly wouldn't dismiss their concerns. I'm a parent. If one of my children, came home after having been vaccinated and, had a seizure, yeah, I would be concerned. And so I try I truly sympathize with my patients, and I would truly sympathize with that parent. And I would try to understand, everything I could about that particular case. And I would take it very seriously. And I would sympathize. Yes, I understand. So I do understand why it's concerning.
It sounds like you have an open mind.
Yes.
And honestly, that's all I'm asking. I think that's all that anybody in this community is asking. Please, God, have an open mind. Help us discover the cause.
100%.
Help us understand this. Nobody's suggesting violence. Nobody's trying to incite violence. They're frustrated. They maybe write something on Twitter that maybe they regret later on when it gets bandied out in a Senate hearing. But it's just that pent up frustration of we've been ignored, we've been gaslit, we've been vilified. That's the problem. So again, I truly appreciate. I think you've been a very good witness. You've obviously you're outnumbered. I think, as I said, weather the storm. You've been pretty sport, and it sounds like you have an open mind. So that's really all I'm asking of not only you but everybody else is have an open mind.
100%.
Okay.
We're on the same page.
Okay, so again, very quick.
Can I respond to the point of civility? There's nobody out there that you can talk about the way that the media and the medical profession talks about people that don't vaccinate. Throw them out of school, kick them out of their jobs. The way that those folks are treated, they're not to be lectured by anybody about civility. That is the height of absurdity. Absurdity. I mean,
But now
truly
I-
absurdity.
So I actually have
It's an insult on top of injury.
So
That's
I-
what it is.
So I actually have one extra. This is a genuine question because it always popped up during COVID, and I have to ask the same vaccines. I asked repeatedly during COVID, if these things are so effective, why do you care whether somebody else gets vaccinated? I mean, I think that applies to that. I realize there are some children immunocompromised can't get vaccinated. I got that, but
Well,
still.
Senator, you know our firm has the largest practice in the country that represents children that need medical exemption. I will tell you, we don't have a single client whose immunostate, their neutrophil levels are such that they're only susceptible to disease that could really injure them for the few that we vaccinate, but not the other 1,400 known pathogens. It doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's a myth, basically. But it's a way to bludgeon again the kids whose parents typically don't need these vaccines. Can I just say one thing about the autism bit, just because it's been bandied about? You know, we sued the CDC for the studies that support that the vaccines given in the first month of life do not cause autism. We sued them because they wouldn't give it to us. We said, give us the studies that show the meningococcal vaccine, the polio vaccine, the Hep B vaccine, the HIV vaccine, and the Hep B vaccine. Those 5 vaccines don't cause autism. You know what they provided? None. We sued them in federal court. They ended up in stipulated order. They gave us 20 studies. Not one of them has to do with those vaccines. They're all MMR or they're all thimerosal. This notion that there's a mountain of studies out there that show vaccines of autism is ridiculous. And I've heard the measles death in Texas bandied about. We represent one of those families. We've seen the medical records. One of those kids, I can tell you for certain, did not die from measles. He died from hospital malfeasance. That's what he died from. He wasn't even having measles when he died, and we'll be putting out as part of that. And somebody else has reviewed the medical records of a second kid. I agree we shouldn't engage in fear mongering. And if we're talking about the overview of the scientific literature, instead of randomly looking at studies, maybe start with the Institute of Medicine reviews of the entire body of literature from 1991, 94, 2012, the HRQ reports, and you can see how vacuous vaccine safety science is. I'll leave with one last point. Look, if vaccines are so safe, why are they the only consumer product where you cannot sue the manufacturer for injuries to claim it was made safer? It's been 1980s, it's been over 30 years they're telling you Hep B safe, HIV safe, these are safe. You still need immunity? Okay, let me tell you my definition of vaccine, Senator. It's a product that causes so much injury that it has to have liability for the injuries that it's causing, immunity for the injuries that it's causing. That's what a vaccine is.
So again, I want to thank the witnesses. And again,